I was a location scout for a movie studio that would probably appreciate it if I left their name out of this account. For legal purposes, I should state that no one from or related to my former company encouraged or enabled the actions taken in this story. I acted entirely of my own volition, and the consequences I now bear are mine to bear alone. It might be nice if insurance would cover my therapy appointments, though. I needed to find a quaint Midwest town for an upcoming film about a couple of fugitives who hide out in one such town and slowly take over its population through fear and blackmail. The script was, in my opinion, a little cheesy, but that tends to be the case pretty frequently. A good director, decent acting, and an emotive soundtrack can do a lot to cover for bad writing, as can, of course, a compelling setting. That's why I drove all the way out to the heart of Iowa, the land of Oz, if instead of poppies the fields were filled with corn, and instead of falling asleep walking through them your skin itched and your nose ran constantly. A few miles north of Clear Lake on I-35, I started seeing the type of scenery I pictured for the fictional town. I took the next exit and drove for a distance. I would see nothing but empty fields for miles, then suddenly come across a 2-story farmhouse with 2 barns, one decimated, and all types of vehicles scattered around the yard, and I would wonder, how does someone who lives way out there get their groceries? Where do they get fuel for their tractors? And what if somebody living out there got hurt? Like seriously injured? Don't tell me agriculture isn't prone to horrific accidents. I remember glancing down at my phone shortly after getting off I-35 and being surprised to see no signal at all. Did anyone living out that far even have cell phones? What about internet? Anyway, you're not here for my musings on rural Iowa. You're here for my story, right? You know, I swore I would never tell a soul about this because I thought people might call me crazy or say I made it up. But time has helped me come to terms with what happened out there in the middle of nowhere, and I think I'd rather get the story out than keep it tucked away in the basement of my mind. Maybe someday I'll even write a script. Somewhere, desolate somewhere, northwest of Clear Lake, I noted a white steeple on the horizon. It barely rose above the golden tassels of the dry cornfields. The crooked wooden cross, barely still mounted at the peak, told me it belonged to a church, not a schoolhouse, of which there are still a few scattered around the countryside, no longer operational, I hope. A country church played a significant role in the screenplay, so I got excited. Up ahead, a few trees which had been spared when the land was cleared for fields stood guard in front of what appeared to be exactly the type of place I was scouting for. I slowed and pulled onto the skinny gravel shoulder in front of a weather-beaten sign which read, "Welcome to McIver, population 2." A big chunk had been taken out of the wood right behind the 2 in what I hoped was supposed to be 200-something and not 20. Or, the possibility struck me, that someone might have intentionally removed the last 2 digits because only 2 people still lived in McIver. I shuddered at the thought of meeting the 2 hangers-on, trying to imagine what such a straggler might behave like. But I also felt excited by the possibilities presented by a near-empty town. In the script, a whole block of houses is burned to the ground. As long as the studio procured the proper permits, I thought whoever ran the county might actually appreciate us coming in and removing some of the old houses for them. My first trip up Dandelion Avenue, which appeared to be the main road through McIver, informed me that the population statistic on the sign probably needed to be updated to 0. The first building I passed looked like it might have once been a post office, but someone removed all the signage long ago. I could still see faded rectangles on the bricks where the signs used to be, and a single rusty blue mail collection box. The small parking lot beside it only had 3 stalls, so I guessed even in McIver's heyday, not too many people called it home. Behind the post office, I barely noticed the decrepit remains of an old metal jungle gym and a single A-frame left over from what had once been a swing set. Grass grew through the pebbles beneath both, evidence of years of neglect. The houses lining Dandelion Avenue looked about as well maintained as the playground. If anyone did live in any of them, I pitied them. I counted 3 collapsed roofs. Most of the former homes had at least one broken window, but many of the houses still looked habitable, at least from the outside, which is all we needed for the film, and we could always shoot the interior scenes somewhere else. At the end of the street, the white church which had first captured my attention stood as if watching over the decaying houses. It looked austere. The cross hanging from the steeple appeared less symbolic of hope and more like a threat. The houses I viewed while turning onto subsequent streets did not look any better than those on Dandelion Avenue. Those nearest to trees seemed to be the worst off. I'm guessing a few of them had roots growing into their foundations. Large tree limbs even rested on top of a couple of houses. The first and only other car I saw was a tan '87 Ford Taurus parked outside of a large garage at the end of Deer Street. I parked beside the Taurus to get out and stretch while I tried to determine whether someone had driven it recently. I quickly assessed, by way of the 4 flat tires and the limp gear lever that I saw after wiping gravel dust off the windows, that the car had been abandoned the same as the rest of the town. And that's when I started feeling weird. You might think it would be exhilarating to be able to walk around an empty town, checking out people's homes, looking for hidden treasures. That's what I thought too, for about 3 seconds. The whole urban exploring thing, if you count Little McIver as remotely urban, isn't for me. Logically, I knew the town had likely died for economic or geographic reasons. However, looking around at the crumbling structures lining the cracked roads, I could not shake the feeling that something very dark had happened in McIver. Something which left lingering traces in the air like a plague. I think this idea may have stemmed from a faint odor I caught once or twice on the breeze, which made me want to hold my breath while driving around. As I cruised, I used my phone to Google the town, but found nothing other than obituaries that even mentioned it. I wanted to leave, but I had a job to do. What would I tell the director? Yes, sir, I found the perfect place to film and we don't even have to worry about disturbing local residents, but we can't go there because it smells funny and makes me nervous. It doesn't take a genius to do preliminary location scouting. I knew that. I was replaceable. So I chose to stick around until I noticed any type of imminent danger. I started with a few photos of the playground taken from my driver's side window. Then I snapped a wide shot up Dandelion Avenue. I sent these to the director just to see if I was on the right track. I didn't plan to spend another second in McIver if he did not immediately fall in love with how it looked, which he unfortunately did. My phone buzzed, ringing with a call from the director as I coasted up Dandelion Avenue. Neil, hey, nice work, the director congratulated when I answered. For the sake of preserving his anonymity, I will refer to him henceforth as Bob. Thanks, Bob. I really just got lucky out here. I'm basically in the middle of nowhere, I said. No, but that's perfect, Neil. It means we can shoot without bothering anybody, and if the whole town is abandoned, you said it's abandoned, right? Yeah, that's the way it looks to me, I said. Great. Well, if the whole town is abandoned, Neil, I'm getting excited just thinking about it. The structures, they don't look like they're in great shape. Think we can use any of them? Exteriors, yes. Interiors, I can't really say, I replied. Bob said, Oh, so you haven't checked out any of the houses yet? Gone inside? I asked. No, I'm completely alone out here, Bob. If I fell through a floor or something. No, of course not, Bob interrupted. Please, don't hurt yourself, Neil. I'll just have you send some more pics of the area, and get a few through some windows if you can. I'm especially interested in that old church. Is that a church I saw up at the end of the road? Yep, and it looks to be in about as good a shape as the rest of the town. Right. Well, if you're able to get inside it and take some pics, please do. It would save a lot of trouble if we could utilize the interior, I think. I'll get closer and see if it seems safe, I said. Bob said, Good plan. This is a very important step, Neil, so please, do everything you can. I reversed my car back up the road until my tires bumped against the curb in front of the decomposing church. It sat at a dead end, and I wanted to be able to make a quick, clean getaway if somebody tried to chase me off. I told myself it was only nerves, but I had started to sense a slight tingle on the back of my neck, which made me feel I might not be alone. I exited my car and took a few pictures of the church's exterior. I sent them to Bob, asking, "What do you think?" He sent back, "How does it look inside?" I nearly replied, "Not sure, want me to send pics?" but realized that could be a monumental mistake. "Okay, look, I'll come clean with you. If I told you Bob's real name, it would probably mean nothing to you. The movie I was scouting for came out last year, and I bet none of you saw it. It was not some major Hollywood production. It never went to theaters. But it represented my best chance at breaking into the industry, okay? And Bob, he had this easygoing persona that threw you off guard, but his nasty side could appear at any moment. Personally, I think the bipolar act might have been something he concocted to build a reputation, but it made it terrifying to work for him, especially for someone like me, someone with so much on the line. At the time, I was a full-time middle school teacher, and God bless all you other teachers out there, but spending 5 days a week being verbally abused by adolescents, plus a few evenings being verbally abused by entitled parents, is not how I wanted to spend the rest of my working life. Unfortunately, big shocker incoming, there isn't much one can do with a teaching degree besides teach. I did, however, achieve a minor in film studies, which in a roundabout way presented me the opportunity to scout for Bob. See, I had a class with this girl named Stephanie who... You know what? Never mind. None of that is important. What matters is I needed the summer gig with Bob to go perfectly so it would lead to more and hopefully better work down the line. Otherwise, it was back to the drawing board in the fall. Or, in my case, the whiteboard, I suppose. So, instead of sending my limp response to Bob, I approached one side of the church that was veiled in a web of dead vines, found a window, and tried to take a photo through it. No dice. All the windows were stained glass, so my camera could see nothing through them. I swore, even though I was standing right next to a church. Whoops. I glanced at the cross barely clinging to the steeple and threw it a peace sign to beg for forgiveness. Where I would have loved to feel the warmth of God's forgiveness, I felt only the creepy impression of someone invading my proximity. Again, I told myself it was just in my head. As I attempted to relax, I made my way around the corner to the front entrance. The bulky doors were chained and padlocked. I attempted to pull them open wide enough to stick my phone through and record a video, but whoever had chained them did so well. They clearly hadn't wanted even small animals to have a chance to slip through. Dejected, I nearly gave up and told Bob I couldn't get inside, but I resolved to search for another way in first. After rounding the next corner, I noticed a small cinder block structure that had once been painted the same white as the church. The poisonous smell I'd detected earlier redoubled as I approached this new building. I couldn't decide if the odor was sour or yeasty, but hopefully that gives you an idea of what it smelled like. Approaching the structure made me anxious, but I saw something near it which drove me forward anyway. Another entrance to the church. This door had a long ramp leading up to it and a small canopy over it. Best of all, the door appeared to have been kicked in already. I made a fast approach, intending to bypass the smelly outer building. However, I stopped beside it to take a picture for Bob. This picture was not meant to be a scouting shot, but a warning. The building consisted of 2 rooms divided by a cinder block wall. I imagined doors once guarded each of the rooms because each contained a single toilet seat. And yes, I meant to say only seat because the outhouse didn't offer anything so modern as a toilet. It was a glorified porta-john made of cement instead of plastic, and from the gaping maws of these bio-waste receptacles, a mature growth of black fungus had sprouted. At least, fungus is my best guess for what it was. It looked more like tar to me, but it spread across the toilet seats and floors and up the walls of the outhouse like mold. I pulled my shirt over my nose and mouth as I walked away to avoid breathing any spores, even though, if that black fungus was what I'd been smelling, the stuff was probably already in my lungs. The church's smashed side door made me uneasy. It was the first evidence I'd discovered that another person had been to McIver since its abandonment, and while I heard no sign of another presence when I stopped to listen outside, I would have been a fool to discount the possibility that someone was squatting inside. Of course, you might already think I'm a fool for continuing to explore after finding that noxious black fungus. Don't worry, I will soon come around to your view if that's the case. I entered through the side of the church and walked into a small chamber or room barely illuminated by ambient light leaking in from the chapel. It took my eyes a moment to adjust to the sharp contrast after stepping out of the sunlight. The first thing my vision caught hold of was a small bookshelf from which a pile of dusty hymnals had fallen. It appeared the top shelf may have broken first, then collapsed onto the lower ones. The shelf stood to my right, and to my left I noticed a single short pew serving as a bench. Above this pew, I found the church's fuse box. I was sort of surprised to see anything electrical inside based on the primitive toilets outside. To appease my own interest, I opened the box and checked the fuses. Most were melted and blackened. It seemed the old church may have narrowly avoided burning to the ground at some point, maybe even after its abandonment. 2 metal chutes rose from the top of the fuse box, traveling up into the ceiling. I only mention these in order to describe what I found wedged between them. Someone had shoved a black crucifix into the narrow gap, upside down. I almost took it out to examine it, again just for the sake of satisfying my own curiosity. But when the tips of my fingers brushed its black surface, I recoiled. The cross was not painted or dyed black. It was coated in that putrid fungus. Under my fingers, it felt fuzzy and wet. I instinctively wiped my hand on my jeans and stepped back from it. I snapped a few pictures of the little room, including one of the infected cross above the fuse box. However, when I took that particular photo, I felt a tangible amplification of the invisible presence I'd felt before. It caused me to whip my head in both directions, but seeing no one, I decided to carry on telling myself the church's miserable state just had me on edge. The fallen hymnals blocked the threshold to the sanctuary, so I very carefully stepped over them. The width of the pile forced me to place one step directly on top of it, and when I shifted my weight to that foot, I kicked off a miniature avalanche. Books slid under my shoes as I reached for the empty doorway to stabilize myself with my free hand. My shirt slipped away from my face, but I was still holding my phone in my other hand. I gasped an enormous cloud of that fetid stink into my lungs. I coughed it out and stumbled into the chapel, emerging near the pulpit. I dropped my phone. It bounced off one of its corners and performed a mid-air somersault, landing face down at the foot of the front pew. I retrieved it, covered my face again, and stood to inspect the sanctuary. The whole room was roughly the size of a high school classroom. The stained glass windows, which contained abstract patterns rather than depictions of biblical scenes, filtered the incoming light, basking everything inside in a purplish tone. It felt very melancholy. Dust coated everything, including the air. It floated through the beams of light, never seeming to rest. So dull and hazy was the lighting in the sanctuary that I almost missed the creeping fungus climbing to the ceiling in the back corners of the room near the front entrance. It sprawled over the walls and doors like vascular anatomy. I immediately felt nauseated and turned to leave, but I stumbled and caught myself on the nearest pew. The seat broke away beneath my hand, causing me to land hard on my knees. The room spun around me. The only object on which I could focus when I lifted my gaze was something I had not yet noticed: the cross. Like many, if not most churches, the church in McIver had a large cross with a brass sculpture of Jesus Christ mounted in crucifixion behind the pulpit. I always found it strange that traditional churches most commonly feature the torturous death of their Savior rather than his resurrection. But apparently, seeing Jesus portrayed in agony was not enough for whoever had defaced the sanctuary. The giant cross had been torn from its mounts, flipped upside down, and placed back against the wall where it was held in place by an overgrowth of the black fungus. The substance webbed itself across the brass Jesus's entire body and face. A mural decorated the wall behind the sculpture. If the cross had been in its correct position, it would have bisected the mural, separating a painting of the Virgin Mary holding her existential baby on one side and a host of singing angels on the other. But the eyes of Mary and every angel had been furiously scratched away. And in their place, plumes of black fungus that looked like rotten ears of cauliflower bloomed. These tumorous blooms specifically grew only out of the mural's eyes. I knew I should run. I wanted to. However, I still felt debilitated by nausea. Every step I took toward the side room was a journey of its own. I had to stare down at my own feet to ensure they were actually moving. The floor seemed miles away. Communicating with my legs was like shouting across a canyon. When I looked up, I found I had not moved any closer to the exit. Quite the opposite, actually. Somehow I'd ended up in front of the pulpit. The bulging black eyes of the corrupted angels and Virgin Mother stared down at me, hating me. I experienced the confusion of a drunk who's blacked out and woken up somewhere unfamiliar. It paralyzed me. I could not trust my own senses, my own body, my own mind. So when I first noticed the bottom of the upside-down cross tipping, falling towards me, I didn't believe my eyes. I held my breath, tried to make the room stop spinning, but the cross continued to fall. Driven by instinct, I dove away just before the heavy cross smashed the pulpit, broke through the short steps to the stage, and crashed through the sanctuary floor. The impact rocked the boards beneath me and shook the whole church. The pew nearest me tipped upward like a seesaw before tumbling chunkily into the cavernous hole, igniting a plume of dust which disabled my already compromised senses. All but my hearing. Something growled deep below. I at first believed, sheerly out of desperation, the growl had actually been the heavy pew crashing into some large metal thing, a boiler perhaps, in the bowels of the church, but it resounded continuously without any loss in velocity, then paused. When it resumed, it adopted the breathy quality of a deep whisper. The low sound had a purposeful rhythm. I vaguely recognized the hallmarks of human language, but I could make no sense of the words. To explain why I did not immediately rush out of the building after the inexplicable collapse and the subsequent sounds, whenever I did move in any direction, the floorboards squealed at a high pitch, a sound which made me picture nails pulled out to almost their very tips. I knew a wrong step could send me down into the darkness beneath me. I had no choice but to crouch, still, and wait for the dust to settle. This provided me the time to focus on the chanting voice. I finally grasped the word's rhythm, although I still could not understand them. It sounded like the voice was saying, "Hike past the dome of May and Uncle." I stored this nonsense in my memory well enough to study it later. At the end of this story, I'll tell you what I think the voice was telling me. I dropped to all fours, coughing, retching. I crawled, feeling for what I could not see. I felt a vibration with my hands which my feet had not detected through my shoes. It was faint, but incredibly active, like a dull pulse of electricity humming through the building. I looked back at the jagged maw smashed open by the fallen cross, although the dust was finally beginning to settle in the hazy sanctuary, falling like a sheer curtain. I could make out nothing in the hole below. At first, I blamed shadows for the black disguise, but the longer I stared, the more clear it became that my vision was being interrupted by something opaque. It was moving, rising up out of the cavernous hole, a mass of churning spores. And like the ominous silhouette of a creature standing in the dark, I began to see the faint outline of a gigantic tumor in the pit, like those growing out of the angel's and Mary's eyes. Upon this observation, I also noticed the new and perturbing sensation of something wriggling in my chest. My lungs felt heavy and my throat constricted from within. I felt it, the black growth building within me, and stood to run. Throwing caution to the wind, I leapt over the pile of hymnals at the threshold. This left me at a loss of breath I nearly could not recover. I stumbled through the side room, coughing and hacking black wads of phlegm. By the time I reached the exit, my throat felt as wide as the needle on a basketball pump, but when I stumbled into the relatively fresh air just outside of the crumbling church, my airways seemed to open immediately. I did not regain my full respiratory capacity in that instant, but I sucked in enough air to continue running. In my peripheral vision, I detected motion coming from the outhouse, but wasted no energy turning to look at it. I understood all I needed to. There was evil below the church, something which had corrupted it and apparently spread throughout the town until it choked out all life there. I wondered how many of the residents escaped by abandoning their homes, and how many succumbed to the sinister spores or whatever force for which they infected by proxy. I escaped in my car and sped out of McIver, reaching almost 70 miles per hour by the time I passed the former post office at the end of Dandelion Avenue. I did not pull over until the ghost town vanished from my rearview mirrors. By then, my lungs felt sore but clear, and my throat no longer threatened to close off at any second. Parking on the shoulder, I took out my phone to call Bob and tell him McIver was off and that I needed to go home. I would come up with some excuse. So what if I got fired? I was just happy to have escaped with my life. When I looked at my phone, I saw myself staring back. The camera app was still open and set to video. I checked my recent videos and saw a 3-minute clip I had not intentionally recorded. It turns out, either when I dropped my phone in the sanctuary or when I picked it up, I had accidentally pressed record. In that moment, I could not bear to watch the clip, but we will return to it soon. Bob called me. His number appeared at the top of my screen while I was trying to decide whether to watch the video clip. I answered and told him McIver was a no-go. "What? It looked so promising," Bob said. "I know, but there's just too much corrosion," I replied. "The structures aren't sound. I almost fell through the floor of this old church and—" "Go back," Bob said, cutting me off. I squirmed at the dooming authority in his voice. He said, "If you want any future in this business, you will go back to that church right now. I want photos. I want videos. I want you to explore every nook and cranny, and I don't want to hear from you again until you've done it." He hung up. I tried to call back, but found I had no signal. I remembered not having a signal when driving towards McIver, and a terrible suspicion pawed at my mind. I checked my recent calls. Remember, I talked to Bob on the phone while in McIver, as well as there on the side of the road. I'd sent him pictures, and he had responded. To go from a signal that strong to absolutely no bars in a matter of seconds made no sense at all to me. My nausea returned as I opened the recent call list. My most recent incoming call was from Bob's assistant the previous day. She'd called me to go over the shot list before I left on my scouting mission. Fingers vibrating, I navigated to my texts. All the photos I'd attempted to send to Bob had red exclamation marks next to them, and read text below, reading, "Not delivered." I dropped my phone on the floor of my car, jammed the lever into drive, and sped away as fast as the car would take me. For 2 days, I half-heartedly searched for another filming location, but I finally called Bob and quit on the third day. My experience in McIver spoiled the excitement of a budding new career and left me unable to escape a trench of fear. I didn't want to leave my house for a long time. I didn't trust my own senses, nor did I trust my mind. And here's the main reason why. When I got home the night after I visited McIver, I finally reviewed the accidental recording from inside the church. It was unsteady and hard to watch, but did clearly show the enormous upside-down cross fall through the floor. However, if I paused the video when the camera brushed past the hole the cross left, I did not see an impenetrable black cloud. Rather, I saw a water heater and something that may have been a fallen refrigerator or a freezer chest. I put on headphones and listened for the hollow, whispering voice I'd heard, but all I heard was my own troubled breathing after the pew fell into the hole. My phone captured brief instances of the mural behind the pulpit, both before and after the cross fell. Mary's and the angel's eyes had been scratched out, but nothing grew from their vacant faces. The dark fungus was absent from the entire video clip, as well as every photo I had taken. So what am I to make of this now? What would you make of it? I'm left to wonder, was the fungus there at all? Did I experience an episode of temporary insanity which caused me to dream everything I had experienced in McIver? I'm not sure about all of it, but I have evidence that the giant cross fell on its own. So then, what else was real? I've come to wonder if this is perhaps the wrong question, as it relies on a certain definition of the word real. I often wonder now, when looking back on that day, whether I did find something real enough to cause an entire town's worth of people to abandon their homes, seemingly without reason, but something real that can only be seen, heard, and felt by the human soul rather than its senses. By the way, I asked Bob about the phone calls when I called him to quit the project. He gave me a look that said he thought I was crazy. He told me we did not speak at all. So, friend, ponder with me. What do you think wanted me to go back to the church? I was determined to find an answer to my questions that was not my own insanity, and I still had one piece of sketchy evidence to test. The words spoken by the voice. Hike past the dome of May and Uncle. I tried to unwind this riddle and failed numerous times. I Googled it, searched Reddit, and everything else I could think to search, but came up empty-handed. Finally, on a total whim, I opened Google Translate and set it to detect language. I spoke the words, hike past the dome of May and Uncle, trying to blend the words and match the diction of the rumbling voice below the church. It took 7 tries, but finally I tricked Google into thinking I was speaking Latin. The phrase it heard me say was, Haeceste domus mea nunca. Numb with apprehension, I clicked translate. In the right-hand box, the one designated for the English translation, these words appeared. This is my house now. I've been praying, mostly whenever I feel a twinge of something sore in my chest. Hopefully, I was only given a warning for my sin of trespassing and not a death sentence. Hopefully, whatever corrupted that church and the whole town around it won't end up corrupting me, too. Congratulations. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For ad-free episodes and bonus Into the Woods episodes, become a patron with the link in the description. You can also support the show by buying merch. That link is also in the description below. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram at The Warning Woods. If you feel ready, meet me here next week for another journey into the Warning Woods. Thank you for listening.